My wife shrugged and said she didn't feel desire anymore. But her sister whispered words that made everything unravel. Looking back, the unraveling didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like a draft through a window you can't quite find. At first, it was subtle. Fewer kisses that lingered, fewer touches that carried weight. A quiet shift in the way she held herself when we crawled into bed at night. We'd always had a healthy rhythm between us. Not the kind of passion that burns so hot it fizzles fast, but steady, reliable warmth, the kind that makes a marriage feel alive. And then, somewhere along the way, that warmth cooled. At first, I thought it was stress. Work had her stretched thin, deadlines stacked on deadlines. Some nights, she came home exhausted, collapsed into bed before I'd even brush my teeth. I told myself it was temporary, that once her plate cleared, things would fall back into place. But weeks stretched into months. The touches that used to come so naturally, her hand finding mine, her head resting against my shoulder on the couch, stopped arriving. She started sleeping in pajama sets buttoned up to her collarbone. Nights that used to end in closeness now ended with her scrolling her phone, turning her back, and muttering, "Good night." I tried not to overthink it, but the absence was loud, louder than silence, louder than words. It seeped into every corner of our marriage, turning what used to be our sanctuary into a room filled with questions I was too afraid to ask. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning, the first crack in a wall that would come crashing down. It started with excuses. She'd come to bed late, long after I'd already drifted off, or claim she was too tired to talk, too tired to be touched. Then it shifted into something else. Claims that she slept better alone, that the room felt too warm, that my tossing and turning kept her awake. So the couch became my bed. At first, I thought it was temporary, a week at most. I didn't even complain. I told myself marriage was compromise, that giving her space for a little while wasn't the end of the world. But a week turned into two into a month. Before I knew it, seasons were changing outside, and I was still waking up with a stiff neck and a thin blanket while she slept upstairs in our bed. The strangest part was how normal it started to feel. I'd come home from work, drop my bag on the counter, and glance toward the couch as if it were my designated spot. She'd watch TV upstairs or busy herself in the kitchen, and our paths crossed less and less. We coexisted, but we weren't living together in any real sense. What stung most wasn't the distance itself, it was the quietness of it. No fights, no screaming, no slammed doors, just absence. The kind that settles in like fog, slowly dulling everything until you don't remember what clarity looked like. Sometimes, lying there staring at the ceiling, I wondered if this was just what marriage became. If passion always faded into parallel lives, if closeness always gave way to polite distance. But another voice in me whispered that no, this wasn't normal. This wasn't what I signed up for. I tried to convince myself it was just a rough patch, but deep down, I knew better. The couch wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a symptom, a sign, a warning I didn't want to face. And every night I stayed there, it got harder to believe we'd ever find our way back. I've never been the type to shout my way through problems. My father was that man, Raised voices, slammed doors, anger filling every corner of the house until it suffocated everyone inside. I swore I wouldn't be him. So, when the distance with my wife grew into something I couldn't ignore, I tried the opposite. I tried calm. I brought it up gently at first, on evenings when we both had the rare chance to sit down together. "I miss us," I said once, my voice steady, not accusing. She gave me a tight smile, nodded, and said she was just tired. I let it go. Weeks later, I tried again. "Do you think maybe we could spend more time together? Just you and me?" I suggested a weekend getaway, even circled dates on the calendar. She agreed in the moment, but when the weekend came, she suddenly couldn't take time off work. The bag I'd half-packed went back into the closet. I asked if she wanted to see a counselor. I wasn't ashamed of the idea. I figured maybe a neutral voice could help bridge whatever gap had opened between us. She shook her head immediately. "We don't need that. It's just stress. Always stress." I adjusted where I could, helped more around the house, cooked her favorite meals, even picked up small surprises. Flowers, her favorite chocolate, little notes left in the kitchen. Each time, her smile was polite, appreciative, but empty, like she was thanking a coworker for covering a shift, not a husband reaching out to his wife. It was like shouting into a canyon and only silence come back. But I kept trying, telling myself patience was love, that if I stayed calm and steady, she'd see I wasn't giving up. The truth was, I was afraid of pushing too hard, afraid that if I demanded answers, she'd give me ones I didn't want to hear. So I kept patching holes in a ship that was already sinking, convinced that if I just bailed fast enough, long enough, maybe we wouldn't drown. After months of quiet distance, I decided to try one last gesture that felt familiar, something that had always brought us back together in the past, a night out. Not just any night out, but her favorite, the little steakhouse across town, tucked into a brick building with low lighting, deep booths, and a menu she knew by heart. It wasn't fancy in the way people brag about, but it was ours. Birthdays, anniversaries, even just random Friday nights when we wanted to feel like a couple again. We'd ended up there, splitting a bottle of red, talking too long over dessert. The place had history woven into the wood of the tables, a kind of intimacy you can't fake. So I called ahead and made a reservation for a Saturday evening. I even pressed the one jacket I rarely wore, the one she used to say made me look sharp. She came downstairs in a simple dress, beautiful of course, but her expression was unreadable. Not excitement, not annoyance, just neutrality. On the drive over, I tried to spark conversation. Asked about her week, about work, about her sister. She gave short answers, her eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. I turned up the radio to fill the silence, but the music felt like wallpaper over a crack in the wall. At the steakhouse, we slid into our old booth. For a moment, I almost felt hope, the flicker of nostalgia tugging at me, reminding me of all the times we'd leaned close here, laughed until we were shushed, touched hands under the table like teenagers. But this time, she sat across from me, her posture stiff, her phone face down on the table like a silent third guest. I ordered the bottle we always used to share, hoping, maybe, the familiarity would warm things. She barely touched her glass. Conversation stumbled. I asked about a project she'd mentioned weeks ago. She shrugged, said it was fine. I asked about her family, her mom's upcoming birthday. Another shrug, another clipped answer. I tried a joke, one she used to love, and it fell flat, her lips curving just enough to be polite before straightening again. Dinner arrived, her favorite cut, cooked exactly the way she liked it. She picked at it, moved pieces around her plate, as if chewing required more energy than she had to give. Halfway through, I realized I was the only one really eating, the only one talking, the only one trying. I stared at her across that booth, the candlelight flickering against her face, and it hit me. The steakhouse couldn't save us this time. The weight wasn't in the food or the setting. It was in the absence between us. When the check came, she reached for her phone the moment it hit the table, scrolling while I signed the receipt. On the drive home, she leaned her head against the window, eyes closed, like I wasn't even there. And that's when it sank in. No matter how many dinners I planned, how many bottles I ordered, how many jackets I pressed, I couldn't manufacture intimacy out of thin air. The steakhouse had been our place, but that night, it was just another restaurant, another reminder that the closeness we once had wasn't just slipping, it was already gone. It happened a week after the steakhouse. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. I'd made coffee, scrambled eggs, toast, the simple little routine I clung to, because routines felt safe when everything else was slipping. She sat across from me, in her robe, hair pulled back, scrolling her phone as steam curled up from her mug. I decided to try again. Not with flowers, not with dinners, not with soft suggestions about vacations or counseling. Just words, just the truth. "I miss being close to you," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but inside, my heart could feel my heart pressing hard against my ribs. "I miss us." She didn't look up right away. She just stared at her phone, thumb frozen mid-scroll. Finally, she set it down and sighed, like I'd asked her for a chore she didn't want to do. Then she looked at me, straight at me, and said the words that would carve themselves into my memory forever. "I don't get horny anymore." No build-up, no explanation, just flat, brutal honesty. For a second, I didn't even know how to respond. My fork hovered over my plate, the eggs suddenly cold in front of me. The silence stretched, long and heavy, filling the kitchen with something denser than air. I searched her face for softness, for regret, for any trace of the woman I married. But there was nothing, just indifference, as if she were explaining a fact, like the weather or the price of gas. The words weren't just a confession, they were a verdict. And it wasn't just about sex. It was about the absence of desire, the absence of want, not just for intimacy, but for me. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure if anger or grief would come out. So I stayed quiet, letting her words echo in the silence, a silence louder than any fight we'd ever had. And in that moment, I realized the intimacy hadn't just faded, it had been buried. Her words, "I don't get horny anymore," didn't just land, they sank. They cut through me like ice, sharp and cold, and then they lingered, heavy, pressing down on everything I thought we still had. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty plate in front of me, fork still in my hand, but I couldn't taste anymore. The food was nothing, the room was nothing. All I could hear was the echo of her voice, flat, casual, almost careless. She had dropped a grenade and gone back to sipping her coffee. I didn't explode. I didn't demand answers. I didn't even ask her to explain herself. The words numbed me too quickly, spreading through me like frost until all that was left was stillness. I thought about all the months I'd been sleeping on the couch,
telling myself it was just stress, just a phase, just something we'd work through if I stayed patient enough. I thought about the flowers I'd bought, the meals I'd cooked, the reservations I'd made, the hope I'd stubbornly held on to like a man refusing to admit the house was already burning down. And now here she was, confirming what my gut had been whispering all along. It wasn't about stress. It wasn't about time. It wasn't even about me trying harder. It was about her desire being gone. And with it, the part of our marriage that made it feel alive. I felt myself retreating into silence. Not the peaceful kind I'd once learned to breathe through. This was a dead silence, the kind that builds walls brick by brick inside you. I nodded at her words, gave the smallest acknowledgement I could, because I didn't trust myself to say more. If I spoke, I was afraid the numbness would crack open into rage or grief, and I didn't want to give her either.
She didn't press further. She didn't apologize. She didn't even notice the way I shut down. She just went back to scrolling her phone, sipping her coffee, as though nothing had been dismantled. As though she hadn't just torn intimacy out of our marriage with one sentence. That morning, I learned something about myself. Sometimes the absence of reaction is its own reaction. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. And for the rest of that day, and the days after, I carried that silence like armor. Numb, quiet, untouchable. But armor doesn't last forever, and mine was about to crack the moment someone unexpected decided to speak up. It was about a week later when her sister showed up. Claire had always been close to us. She was younger than my wife by 3 years, sharper in the way she spoke, and unafraid of honesty that often rubbed people raw. Where my wife softened the truth, Claire wielded it like a blade. We'd never been more than cordial. Family barbecues, Christmas dinners, birthdays, but she always saw more than she said. That night, she came by unannounced. I was on the couch, half watching a game I didn't care about, the TV volume low enough to drown out the silence of our marriage without demanding my attention. My wife was upstairs working, which had become her new excuse for isolation. Claire knocked once, then let herself in, the way family does when they're tired of waiting. She glanced at me, then at the cold beer sweating on the coffee table, then at the couch I'd been living on. Her eyes narrowed, like puzzle pieces were falling into place. "Where is she?" she asked. "Upstairs," I said, my voice flat. Claire studied me for a long moment before walking to the kitchen. She returned with a glass of water, sat across from me, and lowered her voice. She told me something. About you. About intimacy. My chest tightened instantly. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to revisit those words from the kitchen table. But Claire leaned forward, her voice steady, unflinching. She said she doesn't get horny anymore. The numbness inside me cracked just a little. Hearing it echoed, repeated by someone else, stripped of the thin privacy we'd had, it stung worse than when my wife had said it herself. I opened my mouth to reply, but Claire didn't let me. She shook her head, her expression hardening. "That's a lie." The room tilted. I stared at her, waiting for her to explain, because I didn't understand. She must have seen the confusion in my face, because she went on, her words cutting through the air like glass shattering. "She told you that because it's easier than admitting the truth. She gets horny, just not with you." The sentence hit like a freight train. I sat there, frozen, the weight of her words pressing into me,
heavier than anything my wife had said herself. Claire didn't look away, didn't soften it. I've seen it. The way she talks about other men. The way she flirts when she thinks nobody's paying attention. She's not broken, Mark. She's dishonest. The air in the living room felt suffocating, each breath harder than the last. My wife's brutal honesty had been bad enough, but her sister's revelation that it wasn't honesty at all, but a cover for betrayal, was something else entirely. And in that moment, I realized the numb silence I'd been clinging to wasn't protection. It was denial. Because denial is easier than facing the fact that the person you built your life around doesn't want you anymore, but still wants someone. Claire's words didn't just cut, they detonated, and nothing would ever be the same after that. Claire's words detonated inside me, but the real explosion came when my wife realized her sister had spoken. It started that night. I went upstairs after Claire left, still reeling, the words echoing in my skull. She gets horny, just not with you. I lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, not moving, just waiting for morning to come so I could decide what to do with the truth. But morning didn't wait. It arrived as an argument. I woke to the sound of footsteps pounding down the stairs, sharp voices cutting through the house. My wife and Claire. "You had no right to tell him that," my wife hissed, voice low but venomous. "He had every right to know," Claire snapped back. "I'm not going to sit here and watch you destroy him with lies." I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. Neither of them had noticed me yet. "You don't understand," my wife said, desperation creeping in. "This is my marriage. You can't just—" "Marriage?" Claire's laugh was bitter, harsh. "You checked out months ago. Don't you dare call it a marriage when you've been stringing him along, making excuses, lying to his face." They both froze when they saw me standing in the doorway. The silence was crushing. My wife's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing, like she couldn't decide which excuse to reach for. Claire, on the other hand, didn't look away. She folded her arms and nodded toward me, like she was passing the torch. "Tell him the truth," Claire said flatly. The air was thick with tension, so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. My wife shook her head, tears starting to form, her voice cracking. "It's not like that." But it was. Claire had said enough. The cover story was gone. The excuses shattered. And my wife knew it. The chaos wasn't in the shouting. It wasn't in the tears. It was in the way the foundation of everything I thought I knew buckled under me all at once. One sister had spoken the truth. The other couldn't contain the lie anymore. And I was standing in the middle, watching my marriage collapse, not with one dramatic fight, but with the slow, unstoppable unraveling of secrets.
That morning, I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't even demand answers. Because sometimes the greatest chaos isn't what's happening around you. It's what's happening inside you when the last shred of denial finally burns away. And as I stood there between them, I knew there was no going back. The moment Claire left, the panic began. My wife's face went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for me, as if grabbing my arm could tether me to her side. But I pulled back, and that only seemed to fuel her desperation. "Mark, please, don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She twists things. She always has." Her voice came out too fast, too sharp, like she was racing against time itself. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her unravel. For months, she had been ice, cold and distant,
brushing off every attempt I made to close the gap. Now, suddenly, she was fire, frantic, burning, begging me to look at her, to believe her. But panic is its own kind of confession. She paced the living room, her words spilling over each other. Yes, I told you I don't feel desire anymore. That's true. But Claire, she's lying. She's jealous. She wants to ruin what we have. She always hated that I got married first, that you picked me instead of... Her voice broke off, as if she'd said too much. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. I stared at her. The excuses sounded hollow, desperate. Every attempt to shift blame only made her look smaller, weaker. The more she tried to paint herself as the victim, the more I saw the truth. Claire hadn't been trying to sabotage anything. She'd simply ripped the curtain back on what my wife had been too afraid or too selfish to admit. My wife dropped to the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Mark, I don't want to lose you. Please, I can fix this. We can fix this. Don't let her ruin us." But the irony was, there was nothing left for Claire to ruin. The ruin had already happened. The panic in my wife's voice wasn't about love or remorse or even me. It was about losing control of the story she'd carefully built. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Her panic wasn't proof of love. It was proof of guilt. And standing there, I realized the more she scrambled to pull me back in, the further I was already walking away in my mind. I'd spent months biting my tongue, holding back my frustration, convincing myself that patience and calm were the right approach. But that morning, watching her sob and stumble over excuses, something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in resolve. I sat across from her, my voice steady, sharper than I'd ever let it be with her before. "Stop lying." Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, locking my gaze on hers. "You told me you don't get horny, that it's gone. But Claire was right. You do. Just not with me. Isn't that the truth?" She froze. The air between us was thick enough to choke on. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. And in that silence, I had my answer. She didn't need to say the words. Her eyes said them for her. The dam broke after that. She tried everything. Tears, denials, shifting blame, even anger. She accused me of listening to her sister over my own wife. She swore she'd been confused, that she didn't mean it like that. She pleaded that we could start over, begged me to forget what I'd heard. But there was no going back. Not after the couch months, not after the steakhouse disappointment, not after her brutal honesty at the kitchen table. And especially not after Claire shattered the last veil of denial. For the first time, I told her exactly what I felt. That I was done begging for scraps of affection. That I wouldn't spend the rest of my life sleeping on couches and making excuses for a woman who no longer wanted me. That if her passion had simply died, I might have mourned it with her. But it hadn't died. It had just moved somewhere else. Her sobs turned hollow when she realized I meant every word. She reached for me, but I didn't move. She swore she could change, but I'd stopped listening. The truth wasn't something she could unsay. That confrontation was the clean break, the moment we both stopped pretending. And while her tears filled the room, I felt something unexpected, relief. Not joy, not satisfaction, just the release of a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. When the tears slowed and the shouting quieted, what remained between us was nothing but ruin. Not the kind that sneaks up on you quietly, but the kind that leaves everything in plain sight, stripped bare, so you can't deny what's broken anymore. I remember sitting there, staring at her, realizing I had spent so much of myself trying to hold together something she had already let go of. I had fought with patience, with hope, with small gestures and silent nights on the couch. I had carried the weight alone, telling myself it was strength, when really it was fear. But fear isn't love, and love without desire is just a contract signed in ink that eventually fades. So, I chose myself.
I told her I wanted out. The words came easier than I thought they would, rolling off my tongue with a calm finality. I can't do this anymore, I said. Not like this. Not with you. She stared at me, mascara streaked, lips trembling. You don't mean that. But I did. For the first time in months, maybe years, I knew exactly what I meant. I gathered my things slowly, not in a storm of anger, but with the steady determination of a man reclaiming his dignity. I folded the blanket I'd been using on the couch, set it neatly on the armrest. I picked up my keys, my wallet, my phone. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, like I was marking the end with quiet precision. Her voice cracked as she begged again, promising change, swearing she'd find a way to want me again. But intimacy isn't something you can manufacture on command. Desire is either there or it isn't, and if it only appears when you're chasing someone else, then the person left behind deserves better. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I didn't even slam the door when I left. Because leaving wasn't about punishing her. It was about saving myself. That night, I drove with no destination in mind, the city lights blurring past my windshield, and for the first time in months, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't suffocating. It was freedom. 2 years have passed since I closed that door behind me, and the silence that once felt like loss has become the backdrop of my new life. I've had time to sit with what happened, to replay the slow unraveling of my marriage, and to finally make sense of the lessons buried in all that pain. The biggest truth I learned is this: intimacy isn't optional. It isn't just an extra feature of a marriage. It's the pulse. You can survive without it for a time, the way a body can survive in shock, but eventually, the lack of it kills everything else. My wife thought she was protecting me with her half-truths, telling me she didn't get horny anymore, instead of admitting the uglier truth, that her desire hadn't disappeared, it had shifted away from me. But lies dressed as mercy are still lies, and they do more damage than honesty ever could. Her sister's words cut me, but in hindsight, they freed me. They ripped away the veil I had been too afraid to pull back myself. Sometimes it takes someone outside of the marriage to tell you what you already know deep down, but don't want to face. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing how long I had abandoned myself in order to hold on to her. Nights on the couch, dinners eaten in silence, arguments swallowed before they could surface. I thought that was strength. It wasn't. It was surrender. Choosing myself was the first act of real strength I'd shown in years. Not yelling, not punishing, not begging, just walking away with my dignity intact. Now, when I look back, I don't see failure. I see survival. I see a man who learned the difference between patience and self-betrayal. I see a man who finally understood that love without desire is just friendship with a ring attached, and that friendship alone cannot keep a marriage alive. If there's one lesson I'd give to anyone who finds themselves where I was, it's this: don't ignore the silence. Don't sleep on couches for months hoping the house will fix itself. Don't let someone convince you that your need for closeness makes you weak, because it doesn't. It makes you human. And dignity, the choice to walk away when you're no longer wanted,
is the most human thing you can claim for yourself.